Good morning, everybody. Am I on? I am. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. I'm Juliet Oliver. I'm General Counsel and I'm on the executive team at the SRA. And I wanted to welcome you to the latest in our series of SRA Innovate events. We've been touring this event over the past few years across 10 cities in England and Wales. And although as a regulator, we need to show that we're fair, act without any fear or favour, I think we can be criticised of some bias because this is our second time. We've returned to Bristol for a second time, and I'm delighted that we're here and to see so many of you here today. We've got double the number that we had last time we were here in this museum a few years ago. So you only have to look around this wonderful museum to see that Bristol has a proud history of innovation and invention, from tarmac to telegraph cables, from Concorde to mobile phone technology. And on a personal note, I'm particularly grateful to Bristol and Joseph Fry for inventing the first mass-produced chocolate bars. There are also plenty of other examples of forward thinking, and it was the 1963 Bristol bus boycott against the company who would only employ white drivers that paved the way for new rights and the Race Relations Act. So we're delighted to be here to discuss innovation in legal services. What we hope is that by the end of the session today, you'll have gained some insights into what the legal sector of tomorrow will look like. As well as hearing some inspiring stories, which we hope will give you an idea of the art of the possible. But we also want to focus on some really practical tips, things that you can do today to take the next steps in your business. We want today to be as interactive as possible, so just to warn you, I'm going to be calling on you to join the conversation when we get to the panel discussions. And we've got some really fantastic expert speakers who we're going to be discussing issues with today. But there's no monopoly on good ideas, so we really want to hear from you, we want to hear your views, and we want to hear what you are thinking, what you're seeing, and what you're planning. To get your feedback, we're also going to be running a couple of polls through Slido throughout the day. The details are on the screen. The first one is up there already, and I please encourage you to log on now and to answer the question. As you can see, it's about what you think the impact of AI will be. Will it change the way you deliver services in the next 5 years? So do download the app and take part in that. One other point of logistics, we're not planning to have a fire alarm, so if the alarm sounds, it's the real deal. I'm told that there are a number of exits to leave around the room. Please follow a member of our staff out of the building if you hear the fire alarm. So as I said, we've got some excellent panel sessions coming up. We're going to kick those off in about a quarter of an hour. But before then, I'd like to ask Chris, who's our Director of Regulatory Policy here at the SRA, onto the stage. He's going to talk about why we at the SRA are interested in innovation, what we're doing at the SRA, and what we want to do to support your new ideas. So, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Juliet. And I'd just like to echo Juliet's thanks for everyone for coming today. Beautiful city, great venue. You can see why we come back, and nice to see that the sun has come out a little bit compared to when I got off the train this morning. The reason we're here, as Juliet said, is because innovation matters to us at the SRA. Well, how much does it matter? Well, supporting innovation and legal technology is one of our 3 objectives in our corporate strategy. The SRA Innovate is dedicated to help us meet this objective, and we have placed supporting small firms to use technology effectively at the heart of this. The priority is also one of our priorities in our new corporate strategy for 2023 to 26, which we're consulting on at the moment. That consultation closes on the 2nd of August. On our website, please do take a look and let us know your thoughts about it. So why is supporting innovation and technology a priority for a regulator? Well, one of the crucial things is that it helps or can help increase access to justice. I think we all know that too many people, including small businesses, aren't able to access expert help when they have a legal problem. We all know there's an issue with funding. However, technology and innovation can help with this. It can help people understand that they have a legal problem. It can help them understand the options open to them when they do have a problem. It can help provide services in different ways that suits people's specific circumstances and their needs. And this is even more important in the current economic climate, where there is more need for legal services and less money to buy them. It can also benefit law firms that we regulate, both small, medium, and large. Today, we're focused on small and medium-sized firms, but the potential benefits of technology is being felt across the sector. So it can help you to be more efficient, to run a more efficient practice in a challenging economic environment. It can improve communications with clients, and one of the biggest cause of complaints to the legal ombudsman is around communication and not being kept informed about what's happening in a case. Portals are an area where we're seeing big investment in law tech. It can help with the quality of service. And tests have shown that accuracy of document review is higher using AI than a pair of eyes alone. It can improve the service, the speed of service. Juliet and I were talking from colleagues from down under in Australia about tech systems the other week, and we heard about tech that's producing financial declarations for divorce cases in a day, where previously paralegals were taking weeks to do this. And it can help with compliance, an area where we're seeing, again, a lot of focus in the tech world. So areas like our regulations, of course, but much broader than that, AML requirements, know your client, onboarding, etc., data protection, confidentiality, cybersecurity. And all of this can help free up solicitors' time to focus on the areas where their expertise can make a real difference and can add the most value. So what do we actually do to support innovation and technology? And what does this look like in terms of our role as a regulator? Well, we have a tech-agnostic rulebook that focuses on standards but is not prescriptive about how they are met, so offering real flexibility to embrace innovative solutions. We have our dedicated front door service, SRA Innovate, for innovators and firms seeking guidance on how innovations fit with our regulations and how we can support them in other ways. And we can help you navigate the regulatory landscape with support, insights, and case studies of how others are developing their legal businesses and help you join up with other regulators where there's crossover. Peer-to-peer learning. What we've found is that solicitors really appreciate, what they appreciate the most is the opportunity for peer-to-peer learning with practical tips. So events like today, really important, really welcome, and just a big thank you to all of our panelists as well as all of you for attending. So ask any questions and share learning. So looking forward, well, big changes are happening. I think we've all seen this. Leads to some big questions, things like how people want legal services delivered. Much publicized, but AI is moving on pretty quickly. Lots of opportunities, but also presents challenges for us all, including the regulator. That's something we're addressing and something you'll hear a lot more about today. There are also other technologies, like blockchain, that is already changing the way contracts work. So in everything, what we need to do is balance the material improvement innovation brings with an awareness of the challenges that come with that. And as a regulator, we need to get close to that, keep our ear to the ground about the changes, try to understand them, and then be able to explain those to those we regulate, the opportunities and the challenges that come with this, the risks and how they can be mitigated. So this really means listening to you, what's happening out there, and again, the importance of an event like today. So our new corporate strategy, which I touched on, there's a key focus in that around supporting small firms to adopt technology, along with targeted resources and guidance, and running pilots and proof of concept focused on particular technologies and themes. And further ahead, we've committed to exploring a sandbox aimed at bringing together law firms and tech partners to test and develop practical tech solutions together. So what we want today is to really hear from you, to get your views. The innovation and tech team are here from the SRA. We have a stand outside, so please do go and say hello, ask them questions, see how they can support you, and let them know your thoughts. Hope you enjoy the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Well, as Chris mentioned, and it won't have escaped anybody's notice, the big conversation in recent months has been about AI. Hot off the press from our Slido poll, thank you, everybody. You were very kindly you answered my call to action. So I thought I'd let you know the question, will AI change the way you deliver services in the next 5 years? 52% of you said significantly, so over half. 33% moderately, somewhat 15%, but none of you said not at all. So I think we can all see that this is going to affect the way we work, and for 52% of you, significantly affect the way we work. I'm going to be asking our panelists when we get to the next session for their view on the potential impact of AI. But ahead of those discussions, we thought it might be useful to have a quick explainer about AI. I recognise some of you will be all over this. Certainly 52% of you already can see what you're going to be doing. But there are going to be different levels of knowledge in the room, I know. For some people, it will be a bit more mysterious. I personally only heard about AI hallucinations very, very recently. So for me, it's a learning curve. Some of you might just want a refresher. So we've invited Tom along from the SRA. He's going to give us a 10-minute crash course on what AI is and, just as importantly, if not more importantly, what AI isn't. He leads our data science team here. He's warned me that this might involve a maths lesson, but he's told me it's going to be very quick and that even I will understand it. So on that note, Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Juliet. So yeah, there is a brief maths lesson, but I promise it's not too strenuous. So I guess to start with the big question, what actually is this thing? We hear about it all the time at the moment, artificial intelligence. What actually is it? And as Juliet said, what it's not. So forget Isaac Asimov and the Terminator and Cyberdyne systems. We're not talking about science fiction here. The slightly glib answer I give to family and friends when I'm asked this question, and this might be biased by my statistical background, is it's just a fancy name for statistical modeling. The mathematics has been around in some cases for 100 years. The massive boom and change we're seeing recently is kind of more driven by the availability of data and processing power and data storage than actually by kind of novel techniques, although there are new techniques coming along too. And I guess a really key point that a lot of people often don't realize is it's already ubiquitous. AI is everywhere. Every single one of us uses it every day. If you use Teams or Zoom with the voice calls, if you blur your background, AI is doing that. When your camera autofocuses on you, that's driven by AI. Even Microsoft Spell Check is driven by AI these days. So we are all using it all the time. And now, apologies, the beginning of the Tuesday morning maths lesson. When I say it's all statistical modeling, what do I actually mean by this? And when we deal with statistical models, we tend to there are lots and lots of different algorithms, but we tend to group them into two functions. And I like to think of these as in terms of what they're actually trying to do. So unsupervised learning algorithms are designed to kind of spot patterns in data, whereas supervised learning algorithms are looking to predict the future. And I use inverted commas because by the future I don't necessarily mean in time, but the future in terms of the data, stuff that the model hasn't seen before. The terms unsupervised and supervised just come from the fact whether we tell the computer the answer in advance or not. So to very briefly show how these work, if we have a data set like this one, every circle represents an individual data point. To put this in context, let's say within a law firm, each point here is a matter that's been worked on in the last month, year, whatever. And on the x-axis, so along the horizontal, we have how many hours were spent by fee earners working on the matter. And up the y-axis on the vertical, we have how much turnover was generated, so how much money you actually got from that matter. And if we feed these data into an unsupervised learning algorithm, it might sort of cluster them a bit like this. And you might look at this and say, yeah, that kind of makes sense. From red through to green, we're going from kind of simple, medium, complex cases. And then we've got these kind of edge cases in blue and yellow, where maybe in blue, I'm not sure, for some reason, we've ended up with something really profitable, whereas in yellow, we're spending a lot of time and not making a lot of money, and maybe we're a little bit worried about these cases. And this is really useful because the machine can just kind of highlight these, and we can look at them and kind of say, right, what's happening in yellow, and how do we get more of the blue, essentially? And that's all unsupervised learning basically works like that. It's spotting patterns in data. Supervised learning, very similarly, we have a set of data points here, in circles. And in this case, let's say that along the horizontal, we're a big firm today. We have each of these is a department within our firm. And on the x-axis along the horizontal, we have how many people that department employs, how many fee earners, and up the y-axis is how much revenue that department generates each year. And the red line that we can draw through this is our artificial intelligence model, in this case, is that red line. And this is really useful because let's say we've got some money to burn and we want to buy a new department from somewhere, we're going and maybe merging with somebody. We could realistically say, if we know it employs this many people, following patterns we've seen in the past, we could realistically expect to make about this much money from that new department that we've gone out to buy. And you can see why this is quite useful when projecting forwards and predicting the future. Obviously, these examples are a little bit trite and probably made more trite by me trying to shoehorn in to make them relevant to, semi-relevant to law firms. We wouldn't actually use AI in these cases, obviously. There's only 2 dimensions. We could do all of this by AI. AI really shines where we have lots of data. So rather than 2 dimensions, we're dealing with 10, hundreds, millions of dimensions, which brings us kind of nicely to, I guess, the flavor of the month. Models built, large language models like GPT, built on millions of data points. So I would guess if you're here, you've at least heard of ChatGPT. Over the last few months, it's kind of inescapable in the news. This is just a screenshot where I asked it a fairly boring question, I guess, but it gave a fairly sensible answer. And I want to kind of talk a little bit about these large language models. I say other models are available. Google have one called Bard that's fairly similar. And so you may have interacted with ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is actually, there's a bit called Chat that sits on top of the really clever bit called GPT. And GPT is the large language model itself. And this is proprietary, so we don't know exactly how it works. But it's basically a combination of lots of different statistical models, similar to what I was describing before, all working in essentially those same ways. And trained on massive data set, essentially the internet as of fixed dates. And what's really kind of cool about these things, I guess, and one thing I've been really amazed by is there are 2 ways to access GPT. There's the Chat GPT, which I kind of think of as like the pub quiz version. It's really great if you want to cheat for your team to get that bottle of wine or something from the pub quiz prize. And don't get me wrong, it is really cool. We've seen good stories and bad stories of things that people have used it for. But the real power for me of GPT is that OpenAI, the company that produce it, provide an API. And for those who don't know, an API is basically like an access point in a piece of software that allows another piece of software to talk to it. And this is really, really powerful because you can essentially harness the power of GPT, that large language model, and integrate it into your own processes or products or systems. And to kind of test this, when I first saw that there was an API available, I kind of tried. I made a really shonky website that would take user input on a specific question and would basically kind of coerce that question that the user put in, send it to GPT and get a sensible answer. But it doesn't work like chat because it doesn't have a conversation and it won't answer questions not related to the thing that the website was about. So essentially, I'm harnessing and focusing the power of GPT into a specific application. And it took me 45 minutes to do. And this isn't to say, look at me, I'm really clever, I could do this in 45 minutes. It's to say it's really easy to use this. And this is really cool, right? This is the democratization of AI. These things, these large language models, they may have been around a while, but they've been the purview of nerds locked in university basements. Now, nerds like me who have escaped the basement can use them, but really clever people are using them to build really cool products. And that's it's really exciting. I won't kind of go into them. I've listed some on the board, but spoken to people that are on the panel this morning, and they have way better ideas and way more knowledge about products coming up the road using AI than me. But this point on democratization of AI is something I really want people to think about, because it's providing the power. You no longer need to be a data scientist or have access to these reams and reams and reams of data to use really powerful artificial intelligence models. I sit in the research team at the SRA, and we kind of ask ourselves, what does all this mean for the SRA, for the legal sector, for regulation, for society as a whole? And this democratization point, we always kind of come back to the same, I guess, slightly tired pros and cons of AI that we've probably all heard of machine learning for years. There are really cool products, really exciting stuff coming up the line that will change the way we work. And with those, all the kind of classic benefits of automating procedures, speed, accuracy of information, they're the pros. There will just be more of them. The cons, the same. We've all heard of bias in models, right? To use an Americanism, garbage in, garbage out is a kind of a phrase in data science. And it basically just means if your data are rubbish, your model will be rubbish. If your data are biased, your model will be biased. The computer says no problem, I think, is a really key one. And for the legal sector, I think this is particularly important. It's very well documented that people often switch off their mental faculties when a computer tells them to do something, even if they actually think about it for a second and would realize that the computer is telling them to do something really stupid. And I think this is, from a regulatory point of view, this is our biggest challenge. As AI comes in, people still need to engage their mental faculties and not just say computer says no. And societally, one of the top data scientists at Google recently said that as a society, we are really quickly reaching the point where we cannot tell the difference between what's real and what's been generated by AI. And as a society, we have no idea how we're going to deal with this. My favorite example of this, I like this picture, so I wanted to include it. A few months back, I don't know who saw this picture. It came up on my Twitter feed, and I thought, oh, that's fun. Somebody sent the Pope out dressed as a member of E17. It was only a couple of days later when I was reading an article that I realized that somebody had generated this by AI. The Pope hadn't starred in a Christmas music video from the 90s. And, I deal with this stuff all the time, and I didn't even consider that it wasn't a real picture. So I want to kind of end and leave you with a sentiment that I think is really important, is this boom in AI is really exciting, but with it comes a lot of risks, and it is quite scary. And we shouldn't let either half of that sentiment distract us or make us forget the other half, right? So we shouldn't be blinded to the risks because the opportunities are really exciting, but we shouldn't seize the opportunities just because there are some really scary risks. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I mean, incredibly thought-provoking, I think, absolutely fascinating. And Tom's going to be around for the rest of the session, so do grab him, and ask him anything, and he's here to help. So now I'd like to ask our 5 panelists for the first panel discussion onto the stage, if I can. In this session, we're going to explore how legal businesses can innovate, what role can technology play, and what the legal sector of the future might look like. So if you'd like to come up and join me, please. Thank you. We're going to get straight into the discussion. So I'm not going to run through detailed biographies of the panelists, but just quickly to introduce, we've got, to my left, Sally from TL Legal, Alan from Family Law Partners, we've got Trish from Blake Morgan here, and we've got the 2 Dans, Dan Jenkins from Boulder Law and Dan Wright from Osborne Clark. So welcome everybody to the stage.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with the same question for everybody. What does innovation in the legal sector mean to you? And I'll start with you, Alan, if I can.
It's always best to go first, isn't it?
Indeed.
Okay, so innovation in the legal sector. This might be a personal answer. We've got 3 minutes, is that right? Just give me that sign. Okay, because I'll flap my lips till kingdom come.
I'll be brutal.
Okay, so it can't be innovation for innovation's sake. We're all time poor. We have a lot of stresses on us in legal practice. So it has to address the pain points. It's got to be for some purpose. We've been told to talk about examples. So back in 2010, when I was looking at our firm's process, I looked at the very first client consultation. I thought, why do we do it like that? It hasn't changed since the age of the scrivener. We get a client in family law, which is my backyard. Clients are super stressed in the first consultation, but we bombard them with questions and we can't give them any guidance, any real advice until we've processed that information. I thought, that's just not fit for purpose. So I thought, what if we could build an application that sat on the internet and it prepared our clients, gathered all that information and squirted it through to us as lawyers, reformatted to fit our brains. So I did that. It's called Engage, launched it in 2014, and it was a transformative point for my firm. It completely changed the dynamic of the first family consultation for all sorts of reasons we may touch upon later in the discussion. So that's the first thing. There's got to be a real world application for it. There's no point otherwise. I think the second thing for me is access to justice. Innovation doesn't have to be about that, but you've got to have something that makes you want to swing your legs out of the bed in the morning. So for me, it's got about opening up the services that we have. So an example again, we could have sat on Engage. When COVID came along, we said we're going to share Engage with other firms free of charge. Anyone who wants it, Resolution family law members. And we did that, and there are about 50 hardcore users around England and Wales now. I think about 300 family lawyers use it. Between them in the last 2 years, they've got through 8,000 submissions from their clients. So share some of this stuff. I think that's a really good point if you're serious about trying to impact access to justice. So that's important for me in innovation. And a final point, I think, for me, is that collaboration is like a secret sauce. So in 2017, from the lessons we had from Engage and the data it showed us, we realized that most family law clients get the fundamental question wrong, which is, what's the best process option for me? Should it be mediation? Is it law and negotiation? Even a lot of lawyers got that wrong. So we applied to Innovate UK. We were awarded funding for something called a knowledge transfer partnership. We did a partnership with the University of Brighton, and I embedded an AI guy in my family law team for 2 years. The poor sod. You know, he just about got out alive. But on the basis of that, after 5 years, we built an algorithmic program that gave a bespoke personal answer to what is the best for me based upon conflict, my communication, my confidence about my financial understanding, the temperature of my partner, and it gives that for free. So collaboration coming out of our silos, because we don't always have the answers as lawyers, I think that's massively liberating. I suspect it's something that we'll probably touch upon a little bit later. That's what it means to me, innovation.
Thank you very much. Trish, coming to you next.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you for inviting me. You've probably all seen from my bio in the papers that I'm probably the least tech-focused individual on this panel, but I come at it from a very practical viewpoint, having been in the industry for about 20 years and worked in all manner of different types of law firms. And so for me, innovation is not just about tech. It's about trying to change our processes to work smarter, not harder, because I think we work hard enough as it is, isn't it? And so where I've seen innovation really work, it is that thinking outside the box type of solution. So I'm a public law lawyer. The types of litigation I deal with is public challenges, judicial review. It's not generally known as a type of proceeding that's particularly tech savvy. But I had a client who was on the receiving end of 20 claims in 1 year, and that's quite unheard of in the judicial review sector. And the way that we dealt with that innovatively was effectively, once we won the first claim and we realised the other 19 were largely the same, I could have gone through all the steps of the CPR and submitted my documents to the court and gone through all the different hoops and charged the client 19 times for effectively the same job. But actually, I took the approach of ringing up the administrative court lawyer and saying, is there a different way that we can do this? Because we want to truncate court time, we also want to cut costs for everybody else. And actually, we came up with a completely different process that was outside the CPR, may not be repeated ever again, because I'm not sure the administrative court lawyer was necessarily allowed to do it. But effectively, we were able to truncate that process and get things moving on an access to justice process much swifter. And I think, certainly in terms of litigation, Sir Geoffrey Vose, the Master of the Rolls, is always talking about how we need to incorporate technology into the court system. And I think there's been some success with that, certainly around COVID, in terms of the way that hearings have run. I attended some brilliant hearings. I had a whole High Court hearing that was all hybrid. And then by the time one of the lockdowns was over, we had a hybrid hearing where all the barristers had to be in court because it was social distancing and all the solicitors could be at home, which was great. But we had to think about, for the client perspective and their understanding of that court process and their appreciation of it, trying to replicate me being with them in a courtroom where I can dissect everything for them when the barristers are talking to the judge. So we used WhatsApp. You know, we might not think of that as being a very innovative solution because we've had it around for quite some time, but it was brilliant. It was, in terms of sort of the accessibility of it, the fear factor had gone out of, oh no, maybe I'll say something that someone could sue me on over in the and the security aspect, but also that thing about us using AI without us realising. All my clients spoke Welsh, all our submissions were in Welsh. I'm not a Welsh speaker, so when we've been talking on WhatsApp, I was having to use Google Translate to dissect everything that they were speaking about on our WhatsApp chat. So I've seen how things can work practically and actually streamline things for us, particularly around the court system. Thank you.
Thanks, Trish. Dan, coming to you next.
We're starting to get a bit more difficult now, isn't it? Obviously mirror what you guys said, but just to explain how innovation works in my mind, to me it feels like being in a perpetual state of motion, in the sense that we are always moving. Doesn't necessarily have to be forward, but we're always moving and things are developing. So when people talk about not looking at innovation, I feel like you're standing still and you're being left behind. But in terms of how I understand it, there's a couple of ways we're looking at it with Boulder. For me, innovation is about looking at the problems that have been identified in the industries or the opportunities. So one of the things that we've noticed is there is a difficulty, especially with mental health and perhaps equity distribution in law. There's a very typical hierarchical structure that we've been looking at. So we've seen an opportunity there, or at least something that I personally believe is probably not quite fit for purpose, or at least leaves room for innovation. So we're looking at what's called a decentralized autonomous organization model, largely akin to a cooperative, but utilizing technology to help with the governance and slipstreaming equity. So that's quite an interesting thing we're looking at the moment, where the law is being written as we speak with regulation. So that's one area we're looking at in terms of innovation, which is largely boiling the ocean. We're taking what is quite a substantial problem and we're looking for opportunities to try and solve it. Whether it works or not, I don't know, but this is what we want to try and do. The other part of innovation for me is largely around culture and language. In law, I think there is an inherent culture that is opposed to taking risks and utilizing technology because we are ultimately scared that we're going to lose our job, I think it would be fair to say. So we are naturally trained to try and take a risk-averse approach, which is what I'm hoping things like this will change in terms of narrative and language. Touching on your point earlier in terms of utilization and having a purpose for the innovation, I agree with that sentiment, but also I want to go one step before that. I think it's very important that we, as an industry, start to have fun with applications and technology. I think we are quite a serious industry, which is understandable. We deal with serious issues, but equally when children are learning, they're playing, they're having fun with things. They're taking quite a risk-free approach. As parents, we guide them, and I know this because I have my 18-month-old daughter who I try and take care of, but we're not forcing her to do something, we're sort of gently guiding. And I think the same approach has to be taken with law, especially with the pace that technology is moving forward. We can't bury our heads in the sand. So for me, innovation as well is about changing the culture of law and the language that we're using and trying to have a bit more fun with the technology that we're using. Now that doesn't mean using technology for technology's sake, but there's a lot of technology that we can use for free, which we'll touch upon later, and I know Tom has touched upon with ChatGPT, that can be used for things outside of our day-to-day work. And again, just to jump the gun slightly, one of the most interesting things I've used ChatGPT for was building a meal schedule for me and my family across 2 weeks and trying to incorporate different foods in. So that's playing with it for what is largely a harmless purpose, but it helps build the understanding of the technology behind it. So I think those, for me, are the two main points, and I won't talk anymore.
I love the idea that your daughter is being trained as a lawyer of the future. You're getting her to kind of code at 18 months. And,
well,
you know, I've got a great image of your family meal times.
I was hoping she'd become a paralegal at 2 years, but it's a bit too young, I think.
Sally, over to you.
Yeah, and I'm just basically going to steal all of your ideas, right? And I just love what you've talked about there, Dan, about innovation being fun. And mirroring what Alan also said around working with local universities, again, absolutely strongly recommend that as a resource. Universities normally have incredible programs where they're actively working with local businesses. We've been through a couple of those programs with our local university, which is Keele, up in Staffordshire. One of which was, quite a formal programme where we had a development schedule, but the other one took us in a really interesting direction, which we weren't expecting, which ended up with us developing a report around the gamification of conveyancing. Now, they're two words that sound quite scary in the same sentence, aren't they? And I'm a conveyancing solicitor by trade, so you kind of fall off your chair a little bit when you start talking about that. But that was such a fun and engaging project to be in, because we were asking different questions, which me, with my lawyer background, we never would have gone anywhere near. And actually, it wasn't as scary as you thought when you got under the hood of that particular project. What we were looking at is how can we apply game theory, where people want to engage with the process, to conveyancing, which traditionally can be seen as a bit of a dry process for people to go through. And yeah, it meant that as we were developing our app out, which helps people from a conveyancing point of view, that we had hopefully some interesting and new features in there which you wouldn't have had ordinarily. But I think the other word, again, to completely steal someone else's word, is around opportunities, right? It's the opportunity to look at things slightly differently and take a step back. And again, wearing my conveyancing hat, certainly the Law Society protocol back in the day when I was a trainee over 20 years ago, we had baked into that timescales to allow for post, because that was the way we dealt with things, right? Or maybe a bit faster if you had the DX back in the day, but whereas we've got so many opportunities now to just take a step back and say, okay, well, we've done this way for a long time. Is it worthwhile revisiting those processes and seeing if there's a different way? And a great example, I think, again in the world of conveyancing, is the work Lanreg are doing with the LLC1 project. If it's not something you've had a look at, I'd strongly advise a little play around with that. It's free to use. And again, we've had, when we get our local searches, right, we've given them a shelf life of 6 months. The reason for that is it's been too costly and too painful to go and refresh that search more often than that. Whereas now with the LLC1 project, that data is instantly available. It's refreshed, I think, on a daily basis. The cost of that search has come down to £15, which is transformational, but it's also free to view. So that means on any transaction, whether you're acting for a buyer or a seller, you will be able to take a look instantly at what's on the LLC1 register, and then also repeat it. It gives us the opportunity to be reducing risk down quite significantly with regards to that. So I think they're kind of two of the big areas, but also around this opportunity for us to collaborate on all of these projects. This session today is a great example in all the work that you guys are doing to bring the profession together to have these conversations, but there's loads of other collaborative groups that are out there looking at law tech, which again, if it's not something that's on your radar, there's a lot out there which is quite easy to find, and yeah, I'd strongly advise to get involved.
Thank you. Dan, so
this is
finally
utterly
to you.
ridiculous now. So I prepared some notes and then you guys have all said all of that.
You could just be furious agreement with everything that everyone said.
I am in violent agreement, furious agreement, whatever. I love some of the stuff that has been said already. I like the language and the narrative bit, and that comes back to the opportunities piece massively. I think, despite my youthful good looks, I've been around for a while, and for the first half of my career, there was no other way of doing stuff. We just did stuff the way we've always done it. And we've now suddenly, over the last decade, 15 years, entered a world where, why do we still do it the way we always did it? So to me, a lot of it comes back to the opportunity that change gives. It then is all about a willingness to change and a willingness to recognise the need to change. And why do we need to change? Because if we don't, we're going to get disrupted. We're going to get disintermediated. What's our relevance if we're still carrying on doing stuff the way that I did when I was a trainee? And that opportunity to ensure relevance and resilience of our businesses, for our businesses to adapt, to become sustainable for what we now are and what we need to be for the years going forwards, I think is incredibly exciting. And it's a bit of that excitement and fun that the whole innovative world gives us an opportunity to really get stuck into. Whenever I put job adverts out for my team, I always include the qualities of creativity and curiosity. We need people just to be thinking slightly different about how we do things. There's absolutely no magic, and I've been very lucky. I've built up a team of ex-lawyers, yes, but developers and designers and product managers and people whose roles I didn't even know existed a few years ago. But the skills and mindsets that they can bring to some of the challenges that our clients have are absolutely fantastic. The point just made about partnering with universities, getting down into the educational level about this as well. That's one of my key concerns. how are we dealing with what skills we'll need in the future as law firms? Will we be law firms? Will we be multidisciplinary firms with law at the core? I don't know. But this is all about that willingness to get stuck into the opportunity, to embrace the challenges, and to make sure that we are adapting our businesses. I was lucky, I've been a partner for quite a long time, but I hate the idea that when I leave the partnership, obviously not for a long time, when I leave the partnership, the firm's got to be in a much better place than when I joined it. For my cohort to have been fortunate to have had the careers that we'll have had and the lives that we've been able to lead, if we just do that on an extractive basis and saying basically good luck to the next gang, that's appalling, and that doesn't lead to a happy retirement. By the way, I also want to touch on, Tom, you said some really great stuff in your opening session, by the way. And I think your scary but exciting, to me, sums up innovation. It really is massively exciting. It is scary because we need to disrupt ourselves. I'd much rather be part of disrupting Osborne Clarke than watch somebody else disrupt it. I'd like to have a meal. I don't mind if the meal changes a bit, but I want to still have one. But it's that scariness is what keeps you sharp. David Bowie had it. If you don't know his line about walking into the water, go on YouTube and search David Bowie walk into the water. The bit that he's talking about where you can make a difference, that's about innovation to me.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for those opening thoughts. I'm going to come out to the audience in just a minute and ask you, for those of you who said that you thought AI was going to change the way you delivered services, if anybody wants to sort of share in what way. But before we do that, so you can garner your thoughts, because I'm going to ask the panel, does anybody want to jump in on what you think the impacts and opportunities, particularly of AI, might be, what you see kind of coming down the line? Maybe you want to kick off, Dan?
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I think AI has the potential to significantly change the way that all industries work, not just the legal industry. I think, well, I know that there are products coming that will change the way paralegals work. I know there are products coming that will change the way trainees are working. There's an element of being scared of that, which I am, but equally, there is a huge opportunity there for us as an industry to value people over and above simply routine or automatable jobs that they do, and to allow them to move into more creative positions. So this is mirroring what Dan was saying. I think these types of development present a massive, massive opportunity if people understand how to utilize it correctly. I think that a lot of the younger generation are probably already quite well versed with this technology. A lot of them that I've been speaking to play with it for fun. They understand how it works. They are using it to develop more skills than the traditional skills one would think to see in a paralegal or you know, the trainee level. So I think at the moment there's nothing that I've seen but good coming out of it, save that there will be an element of disruption in terms of how the existing jobs work, and I don't know how the evolution is going to take place in big corporate law firms. I don't know. But from an individual perspective, I'm very excited about what's coming.
But one thing that we can all foresee is that it will, still an element of the unknown, but that it will have a significant impact.
I think, sorry, Nicola.
No. I think there's things we can start to have a play around with already, aren't there? Whether it's kind of writing meal plans, that's a great idea. I'm completely feeling that one. But yeah, there's these new kind of autonomous agents out there which are taking ChatGPT and then overlaying actually the AI delivering the tasks. And absolutely, I think this concept of democratizing AI is with us now, right? Isn't it? And there's free-to-use versions out there which you can have a play around with. We did a little experiment, in the conveyancing world, because that's how exciting I am. I'd get into my glass of wine at a night of an evening and then looking at the CML handbook, the UK Finance handbook, and can we apply AI to it? But the answer is yes, we can, right? So one of the little exercises that we did, we put in some title deeds and said, does this comply with part 2 of the UK Finance handbook for X lender? And off you go. And what's incredible is you watch it come up with the questions it needs to ask. And it's, some of these agents are out there and they can use the entirety of the internet to gather their answers, which is amazing in one way, but comes with huge concerns, wearing our lawyers out, think, oh my goodness. Now, I have to say, the examples such as that we've been playing around with haven't got the answers exactly right yet. But our sense is that's just a matter of time. The more people type in questions like that, the more it's going to learn and actually. And isn't that good? Doesn't that mean that we can get on with the lawyers doing the lawyering? I don't think when I trained, it was necessarily to be ploughing through the UK Finance Handbook to see if a particular property was compliant. But I did want to be giving the advice and the support to my clients as they were moving through that process, which hopefully frees up our time to be able to do that. So, I think that there's stuff that we can all be taking a look at now, but I don't think we really need to be rocket scientists to work out the direction of travel.
Absolutely. And there's some really good points in that as well. So I'm sure everybody in the room will have experimented in different ways, shapes and forms with some of the technologies and the models and the embeddings so far. And one of the reassuring bits is exactly the point you're making, that we're looking at a centaur world where the opportunity for the human and the machine to be significantly more powerful than either the human or the machine. There's been lots of commentary about the fact that the machines won't oust humans, but the humans with machines will oust humans without machines. And I think that's very much the sense of travel that we're going. Yes, there's almost every instance you're unlikely to get back a quality of answer that you want to put straight out of the door, but you shouldn't want an answer that you want to put straight out of the door. Back to my point about relevance and resilience, you're irrelevant and you have no resilience if that's the case. If it's surfacing up a quality of first cut of information that then enables lawyers to apply their judgment and their experience, to have a value proposition that a client still needs and wants and will pay for, that has to be at the root of everything. We've done a couple of projects building our own sort of mini chat GPT in exactly the same way that Tom described earlier. And we've thrown all of our internal policies and HR world at it and just tried to create in a safe space an opportunity for people to ask it factual questions, am I insured to go skiing? Simple stuff like that. At a level where we're just trying to establish, can it come back with short, sharp answers? And if it knows the answer, it gives the answer. If it doesn't know the answer, it just says, I don't know the answer. And you have an opportunity then, that's then pushed through to HR so they ensure that the answer is either there through training or added through new materials. But that's just a good example of, at a certain level, it can give you answers. At another level, it gives you an opportunity for the lawyers to then really add and create a much more valuable product to be getting to clients, to really help what clients need by way of a solution. But it also is incredibly scary. I mean, Dagmar and I used corporate lawyers back in the day, and one of the gloriously fun exercises of corporate lawyers is to produce verification notes on public transactions. If nobody's done a verification note exercise, do one. It's absolutely hilariously good fun. It takes days and weeks, and it's painful, and there's ridiculous toing and froing, and people get tired and cranky. Well, I did, certainly. But you can now upload a draft document to your safe space and basically ask the machine, produce some verification notes and suggest factual responses to it. And it's that kind of exercise that we all need to be doing every now and then, because it's the whites of the eyes and the, oh my God, this is the worst it's going to be. And it's still doing stuff that makes me actually need to sit down occasionally. And we therefore have got to get ahead of it, got to get involved with it, and just got to work out where's our space, where's our value here.
So can I come out to the audience? Does anybody want to share what they're planning? Have you got any thoughts about where this is going to be heading for you and for your business? No one willing to share their thoughts? 52% of you thought it would have a significant impact. What do you think it's going to, or if you're not planning it, it's just going to hit you from the side, is it?
Too late then.
And I want to, thank you. We've got roving mics. It's Warren, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's sort of coming from the other side now. So after 20 plus years in law firms, I've just stepped out and developed a web app, which I'm now working with law firms on. So I guess I'm walking into the water with my David Bowie soundtrack on. So what I'm saying to law firms is, hey, here's a thing that could drastically help reduce the cost and time to settlement in a disputed matter. And what they hear is, you want me to put personal data onto a cloud-based platform. So it's really interesting to discover these hurdles. I'm just coming back to Dan's idea of how do we play, how do we reduce that kind of risk attitude. So I just wondered if how do we lower the barriers to entry? So I think we're sitting here saying we should all do this stuff. but how do we actually make it feel safer to law firms to do it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Trish, do you want to?
I think the opportunities there, and it sounds the app you're developing is probably going to be something that's going to be really helpful to law firms. But because of that fear factor, they might be less willing to try it out and so forth. But I do think collaboration and training is critical as part of that, because we're all afraid of things we don't understand, and particularly in litigation, we always see the risks first before anything else. But actually, by developing collaboration with providers, with those that are used to doing the lawyering, those used to designing the product, and having people in between that can translate that, I think that is the key aspect. I've been involved in, design of data rooms and project management systems where, we think as lawyers, we've told the IT specialists exactly what we need. We've told them all the different workflows that, if you click that button, it should go to here and here and here. But then when you run the system, there was something that was missing in terms of the instructions that we gave that was interpreted so literally. We couldn't move from step 1 to step 5 without going through all the other steps. So therefore, we ended up with a system that was actually useless to us, because actually it wasn't providing the efficiency that we needed. And so I think you touched upon it about having your tech specialists within your organisation to help understand that difference between what is it the lawyers do, what is it that you want the product to do. And I think a lot of small to medium firms understandably feel that the cost risk is too much for them, and where do they start? Because if, depending on the areas of law they do, they may not need a whole singing, dancing project management system, for example. Whereas I think events like this, and certainly I'm part of our local Cardiff and District Law Society, and we've got a law tech committee, and we're developing a network with IT providers, with database providers and lawyers and experts and universities. At Swansea University Innovation Lab is part of that, to take that fear factor out of it and develop a network where people can come and voice a concern about something, and hopefully someone can give them an answer about it in a light touch way, without someone saying, "Oh, it's going to cost you," like the car salesman. So I really do think training is really part of that as well. I think there's an assumption every young person knows how to do certain things. If I can't work my iPhone, I'll ask my 10-year-old. And he is learning coding at school through Roblox or some other program. I'm not sure he could sit down with an IT specialist and tell him what workflows he needs for a database. So I'm not sure whether the training yet has sort of hit in terms of legal training to develop that skill set that we might need for the future. But that's going to come, I think, with the predominant use of AI.
Yeah, and I want to bring Alan in here because I think there's a lot there in terms of, and I know that you're talking about an area of family law where there might be also some cultural kind of barriers to the idea that that's the kind of, that kind of information would be too sensitive, too tricky. People wouldn't want to engage in technology in that kind of a space, but the kind of cultural barriers and the like. So I wondered if you could give us some thoughts about that.
The question's a great one. So I was there 10 years ago. So the journey I've had with digital work, and latterly with AI in my family law team, has surfaced all of those questions, those anxieties from senior practitioners. So on that very question, one example, the Engage application, launched 9 years ago, the senior practitioner said, "Alan, you can't do that. That gets in the way of the sacred bond between me and my client. It will never work. There are questions you can't ask." And you would think in the family law sphere, there would be some very sensitive questions best left to a face-to-face consultation. We haven't discovered a single question that we cannot ask in the digital journey before the consultation. So we ask about domestic violence, we ask about coercive control. We ask every single user engaged, we say, give us 60 seconds feedback, and we have a 70% completion feedback on the digital application. So I can tell you, if you ask people, they will say, I had no problem answering this question. I liked answering this difficult question in the privacy of my own home. And I would have struggled with it if I was suddenly asked face to face. So there are those questions. We ask questions about menopause, and we ask it for male prospects and female, because I think they're important questions. We know that's a debate that's coming on. We can be a little bit braver on the digital journey. But if I may dangerously drop in the word existential to the discussion at this point, because we've had the 10 years experience of this, what those questions and those concerns which will be dressed up in aspects of legal process, they are addressing something much further underline this is that we need to work out what we are really offering. What are we selling the public and clients? And within our own legal verticals, we need to really address that. And that's what my team has been forced to do over the last 10 years. So I know what Family Law Partners sells. It's not legal services, but I know what we sell. So that's my dangerous existential drop-in at this point. But there's nothing, all of the people who are initially resistant are now massive champions and would not think of doing a first consultation without having the engage input. In fact, they moan like hell if they have to do it the oldie, styly way of saying, I've only got a name. You can't ask me to do a consultation. I know nothing about them. It's quite astonishing.
And having champions in the business and having people who really can see the benefits, you know, to help sort of get that, you know, to get that kind of culture change. I think keeping on the idea of challenges and barriers, Sally, I was going to ask you what you think might be the biggest challenges for particularly for sort of small and medium-sized firms who might want to, you know, take that journey, innovate, make that step towards technology being part of their business.
Indeed, I think we've kind of touched on it, haven't we? I think perceptions around risk and cost are big barriers, and I think that's absolutely fair enough, right? You know, we have regulatory requirements as lawyers that we have to make sure that we're adhering to, and tech providers can come along with a shiny new product. How do you know that that's not going to get you in hot water with the SRA? And I think it can be quite challenging for law firms to know where to start with that due diligence exercise. The big firms, you know, certainly know what questions to ask. But we're starting to see a bit of a change with regards to that. You know, I think there is much more signposting that's available out there for law firms to know what questions to be asking. But I think also the onus is on us as the tech providers, you know, to come along with those answers to the questions which we know are going to come up in those meetings, and quite rightly so. And I think we're always big advocates of also saying that this shouldn't just be technology for technology's sake. The whole point of it is to be moving the dial and to be improving things. You know, so in our little world where we're looking at conveyancing, we talk a lot about the type of big data assessments that we can provide into law firms, visibility about complexity ratings or fraud risks of the types of cases that firms are delivering, or predicted timescales to help with case allocation. So I think it's an ongoing conversation with regards to that, but our sense is certainly over the last 2 or 3 years or so, I think we are starting to make some progress there because the resources are starting to become more available.
Yeah, so overcoming the kind of the knowledge barrier is kind of quite key. Trish, you mentioned cost before. I was wondering, Dan, in terms of your experience, you know, not everybody will have the money or the expertise necessarily to push the boundaries, but what would your advice be for people who want to use technology in an easy way without spending a lot of money?
There's a lot of resources out there that you can utilize for free. I come with a caveat there because some of them aren't necessarily compliant in terms of data security and everything like that, but the point being you can play with all these bits of technology and use them for different purposes than perhaps what you originally had envisaged with your firm. Because in the act of playing with it, you understand what it can do, and weirdly, the problem almost evolves along with the understanding of the solution. A bit like Schrodinger's cat, once you sort of see it, it exists. So my biggest message today would be to go away and find something that you enjoy using. You may discover that there's actually a problem you didn't know you had that you could solve, but all of these things can be used for free. I mean, I've looked at Midjourney, ChatGPT for advertising. You can help with LinkedIn content, blog post writing. You've got different communication methods with clients. You can look at Slack has got a free version, again, with the caveat of not putting any sensitive information in there until you pay for it. So there's so many things where you can just go and try this out as a small business who's, you know, conscious of budget. So there shouldn't be too many barriers. I guess the main barrier is knowing that these things exist. How do you get over that of not knowing what you don't know? Speaking to people, speak to other people who are in similar situations to you. I try and speak to as many people in the SME world as possible. You know, wonderful panelists today who I'm going to be speaking to afterwards, they don't know it yet. Just speak to everyone and say, look, these are the things we're looking at, or is there any recommendations that you guys have for things we can look at?
So we've heard some tips there around overcoming barriers. I just want to once again throw it out. Anybody have any thoughts about what you think the biggest barriers are? Hands have shot up on that question. Right, can we get the mics over here first? Thank you.
Thanks very much. I mean, first of all, just say thank you. It's been really, really interesting. Tris, you mentioned obviously you were able to engage with the judiciary who helped you streamline your cases. We had, some of you may have seen the Gazette, we had to issue some 3,000 claims individually at very short notice, which meant we had about 400,000 knock off our overdraft, and our bank were delighted. But that was because a master in the court decided, against standard practice, that those claims had to be issued individually. So we've spoken, Tommy mentioned the computer says no, but what about the case where the judiciary says no and judges say no? So is one hurdle to innovation going to be the Ministry of Justice and the judiciary?
Shall I jump in there?
Please
Yeah,
do.
I think that's a really valid concern, and you're right, it very much does depend on the judge and the level of court that you're dealing with. I mean, if Sir Geoffrey Vose is, if his missive is followed by most of the judiciary, they are encouraged to use more tech and, more AI within the sort of lower levels of the judiciary. So he's talked about effectively having automated decisions at low-level court level, where you don't need to have oral submissions and so forth. And I can see the benefit in that. That's an access to justice point and all the rest of it. I fear the backlog in the courts would actually increase as a result. But if the tech that's developed is sophisticated enough to determine that a claim should be knocked out because the core components of the claim, for example, a particular claim, isn't there, then I could see actually that will help. That will actually speed up the judicial process. But I think you're right. I think it very much does depend on the judge, and it depends on the court, the particular court and the tech they have behind it. I think some aspects of the commercial courts are very, very tech savvy. They actually don't want any paper. They don't want a single bundle. They don't want a skeleton argument, nothing in paper, and they want all the advocates to turn up fully prepped and primed. If the Wi-Fi goes down, I think that's a bit of an issue. But, I think the courts have done very well. I've also seen tech work very well in the regulatory fitness to practice space. And I used to be of the school of thought pre-lockdown, I was mentioning it to Julia earlier, that I never thought a regulatory panel would want to potentially sanction or throw someone out of a profession without eyeballing them, in a courtroom. But I've actually found that panels feel the use of Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all the other sort of platforms that you can use to video stream a hearing, a much better way of getting to grips with an individual and their body language and, their particular psyche. And I've certainly found in those types of processes, because when I sit as a legal advisor to those panels and I have to go and have pre-meetings with all the different parties and, procedural issues and otherwise, I would always have to leave the room, the tribunal room, and go and have to speak to them in different rooms. I can now do that virtually within seconds, and it actually makes all of our hearings much, much quicker. And in terms of the publication and the public nature of those proceedings, it's all there because it can all be recorded and the video stream is there, and as soon as you close down the link, there's your transcript of the hearing. So I think there is a real value in the tech, but there are certain courts that are still moving towards, and certainly unfortunately the administrative court is one of them, one of the ones that I deal with. Certainly through my Law Society connections, we've got a court user group, and actually the Civil Justice Centre that we have in Cardiff, so it covers High Court, Administrative Court, all the other different types of High Court hearings. They've just asked whether everyone would be happy to go to hybrid hearings, because they went straight from lockdown into back in person, and now they're asking whether there would be an access to justice point if they were hybrid. And that feels a little bit sort of behind the curve actually for that particular court, but they do a lot of family hearings, they do a lot of housing cases where I suspect the judges probably want people there in person because it focuses their mind a little more on the really important issues that are being dealt with. So I think you're entirely right, but if Sir Geoffrey Vose is to be copied, there will be more use of tech and IT within the court process.
Thank you. And we had another hand here and another one there. So you next, thanks. Thanks, Warren. Oh, yep.
Behind you. Thanks. Both Dan and Alan, Dan W, mentioned 10 years as a kind of time frame. looking back over which some of these developments have been happening and people have been becoming a bit more challenging, a bit more innovative. But I think we all know, and everybody on the panel knows, there are lots of lawyers, law firms who haven't particularly. They've probably adopted a bit more technology, particularly around the pandemic and the response to that. So I just wonder whether success is one of the barriers. A lot of those firms and people have been really busy, and I see a lot of conveyancing teams, classic Sally, of, we've just been too busy to think about how to adopt these technologies. We haven't really had a chance to think about it, and how we might deal with that over the coming years, because that tends to be a barrier in lots of industries to people embracing change, because we seem to be doing all right.
I think that's absolutely classic, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've had that feedback from busy conveyancers saying, I'm far too busy to look at this technology which could save me 20% of my fee earning time. The kind of the irony of that. But it's a practical challenge, isn't it? And I think certainly, again, in the conveyancing world, as we've gone through COVID and just how stretched all conveyancers were with the busyness of the caseloads is tricky. Our sense is, I think you have different firms who have got different approaches to tech, and I think the visibility is a big piece. And certainly our sense is that the changes that we've seen since post-COVID, to be honest, I think there were some technologies all firms had to adopt, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be able to progress cases. Whereas in the past they would have said, oh, well, no, we're not necessarily going to look at that, which was a kind of a very tactical response. Firms are now taking a step back saying, well, actually that did work. That bit of technology was okay. So we are starting to have some more kind of strategic conversations saying, well, okay, that bit worked okay. Can we have a little think about what else we might do? But our sense is, I think, as the AI becomes, again, a bit more ubiquitous, and we start to see that wider across the legal industry with some examples of how that's working, hopefully that will help to bring those cohorts of firms along on the journey.
Yeah, come to Dan, and can I just say, and we'll come to you in a moment with your question, because I also wondered, and I wanted to bring Dan in on this as well, that there are some structural, there's some structural issues, partnership models, hourly rates, etc., which of course support firms and seem to be, which actually I just wonder how much of those can be a barrier to innovation, and I know you've been looking at alternative pricing models as one of the things.
There's all sorts. So to Chris's point, you look back 10 years to where we are today, there's been an amazing amount of change. But you look forward 10 years. So Sally, from a conveyancing perspective, my M&A background, they're the same things. They're just transactional processes. I find it unimaginable that in 10 years' time an M&A transaction or a conveyancing transaction will be conducted as we do it today in the main. Therefore, it's incumbent upon those who are incumbent to adapt and to be ready to change. And if they don't, then they will suffer the consequences of that. And I think the speed at which things are now going, the catalyst we've had since November, if that doesn't focus people's minds and finally start to show them that the platform may not be burning, but at least there's some signs of smouldering going on. And the client is the agent of change as well. You and I have spoken in the past, Chris, about when our platform wasn't burning, I used to engage in arson. So I used to go and get a client to get one of my partners to ask me to do something. And when my partner asked me to do it, I'd say, what a great idea. I never could be able to do that. But it just helps to start getting the plates spinning. Those plates are now generally spinning, and it's the clients now for the first time are the ones really coming on, adding more spins, adding more revolutions and more plates to it. Different challenges. So in the use of generative AI, we're starting to see that you shall not put any of our data in public clouds, to Austin's point. So get your own private tenancy, etc., etc. But we can all adapt to these to facilitate the change. And then our own structural models that have hampered some of that change today, again, use the client. If you are convinced things are changing, if you're convinced you want to be part of building the next generation of service, of product, then break the models. Clients don't want to pay on an hourly rate. They want a fixed fee or pay and play for a lot of the digital products we have, or subscription models. You can associate their cost with the value far more closely because your marginal cost of production is reduced, so you're just playing a different game. I love Alan's point about he knows what he sells. We all need to be prepared to just see, actually, we need to sell something slightly different. I'm going to sell facilitating clients do their own M&A, and likewise from a conveyancing perspective potentially. So it's just access to a device, a medium that facilitates them doing what I've always done. So all of these issues can break down barriers, but they are useless if you don't have the mindset to change.
Thank you.
Slightly linked one to Chris's question. So we've got a variety of different organisations in the room, some legal, some non-legal, some big, some small, and all likely to be at various stages of the journey. We've recognised that we're time poor, but we've also recognised that the opportunities are massive. And for years, those of us who've, I think, Dan and I share an age bracket here and there. And for those of us who've been in the game a while, none of those changes about the challenges of persuading people or persuading the risk teams or persuading the lawyers to change have gone away, but the opportunities are ever increasing. How do the panellists find a way of picking the winners? How do they decide what to focus on and where to invest the energy and try to persuade people to change?
Clients, talk to your clients, work out what they actually want to buy. Don't sell them a shiny version of what you've always sold them because they didn't want it in the first place. So I'm not allowed to express how my son expresses that analogy. But we very much use clients as our co-designers of our products and services of the now and of the future. Their voice should ring the loudest.
I think also understanding what your colleagues need as well, because not what one team might need can be completely different to another team, on what tech problems they're coming up against and how they can, how they envisage it streamlining it. I think everyone's probably got a bit of survey fatigue after lockdown and so forth, but actually surveying your staff and your colleagues to fully understand what is it you use, what's missing. We did that in one of my previous firms, and the thing that was missing was one of the legal databases that most of us are grown up using, and this particular firm didn't have. So not everything that everybody needs is all singing, all dancing will cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. Some things are quite, sort of attainable. But if you don't do that exercise, you can introduce programs and systems that nobody understands, nobody can use. You spent a lot of money on something and then you pull it within 6 months. That is far worse, because actually then that turns people off wanting to engage in that process of developing new products and systems internally.
And just to come into that, just to emphasise it as well, it's absolutely about the clients. That's really good. But coming back to that internal battle as well, I think just to keep it real, so in demos of Engage, and I've done it to some large partnerships, you just have to give really specific examples. So one is, I noticed the partners' eyes widen up when I show them how we built in the risk factors. So we analysed all the SRA decisions. We looked at the legal ombudsman. We realised we had to ask emotional intelligence questions, not just because it's family law we're dealing with, but because that is a risk perspective if you disconnect from your clients. So we looked at those decisions and we built them in. So I can see the partners going, it's about risk, I can manage risk. So never mind the smouldering platform, it's also the PII policy catching light in the back of the drawer somewhere in the office. And the other one is if you can measure it. So we measured a long time ago the impact of some of our innovation. So I know last time I measured it 5 years ago, an aspect that we've been able to engineer out of manual time was saving my team £145,000 a year. It's at least double that now because of the size of my team. If you can measure that, suddenly the partner's like, I get it. Okay, you've got me now. You've got my attention.
And well, you get brownie points for making sure that SRA risk factors are taken into account. And Sally, you mentioned earlier, I was really interested in both the sort of timescale predictors, but also you were able to kind of calibrate risk in particular different kinds of transaction, different kinds of matter. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, again, I think the penny dropped with us. We probably would have said 3 years ago that we had a law tech business, but we're now very much in the data analytics because we have all this data, and we spend our days thinking about how we can slice and dice that and come up with hopefully interesting outputs. And yeah, so we did run quite an interesting exercise by comparing. We have a complexity rating for conveyancing transactions based on the
guess what, the complexity of the transaction, but the things like the factors that the lawyers are going to have to be dealing with there. You know, is it leasehold? Is there a rent charge? Are there restrictions? But we also have a fraud risk assessment, which looks at the things from the Law Society's, CLC's fraud risk warning card about the profile of the transactions, and just a very simple RAG report for both of those. And we ran the exercise of running some of the more recent fraud cases through, you know, the P&P and the Dream Bar type transactions to see how they fared. And helpfully, the fraud risk caught both of those, because it wouldn't be a very good fraud risk if it didn't, would it? But what was interesting is that they were low complexity cases, which when you look at the data, there's nothing rocket. No rocket science behind that. If it's a sole owner and there's no mortgage and there's no difficult things to deal with or restrictions or third parties, then that's an easier transaction, but it's one that the fraudster is going to target because there's less people to try and hoodwink. But when we had that realisation, I then went back to the days when I used to be in charge of a team and assign cases, and I would always assign them based on complexity. So I had kind of a little bit of a heart-stop moment there, thinking, oh my goodness, I was putting the poor junior fee earners potentially in the firing line for the fraud cases. And I think it's that kind of insight. That's just one example. There's countless examples of where we can be taking the data, using the technology to be providing us as practitioners with levels of insight we wouldn't be able to get otherwise.
On the point about picking winners, I'd wonder, Dan, talking about sort of playing with technology, if you have any thoughts about sort of failing forwards?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a slightly different perspective in that, I'm at the relative start of my journey, so I sort of have to do everything. So picking the winners is a lot easier for me because I'm at the coalface and I'm also making the decisions as well and see the budget. So the line of communication is all there.
It's just you.
Exactly.
You're having an argument with yourself about whether...
We have terrible arguments. So it's very different when obviously you've grown as a business and you've got different points of communication, so I appreciate that. Interesting point in terms of failing forwards. I think there's always the fear of failure because it carries risk. So it's inherent, again, to go back to the point, in law, risk is a problem for lawyers because that can be threatening for our career or it could harm our client. So there is that problem in terms of failure. But I think failure is an inevitable step towards succeeding or understanding what you're trying to do anyway. So it's an interesting point that everyone's been making. I don't really know what the answer is, but I think the point being we shouldn't be as scared of failure so long as we fail responsibly.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Good luck. We can discuss that later.
And I think a lot of our panellists, we've talked about collaboration and making sure that you're working with other people. And I know that Chris would certainly say, come and talk to us if you've got an idea and you're worried about the regulatory angle or if there's any sort of fear there about, what this might mean or whether you need to work through that in a sort of safe space and a safe conversation. So that's certainly something that we would encourage people to do.
Just sorry to echo that because that's exactly what we've been doing. We found the team at the SRA to be extremely helpful. So everywhere that we've been talking to people, we've really championed that. And that's not just because I'm sat on this stage today, it's the truth. We've had quite a lot of complicated ideas that is sort of blue ocean. We don't really know what we're doing. And the SRA have been extremely helpful. So I just echo those comments.
Good, and I promise I didn't pay you to say that. That was
entirely.
Really yeah. We're almost out of time for this session. I wanted to just finish with a thought because we talked a lot about the client making it real world, making it relevant for clients. But I did want to ask Trish just to if you could give us some thoughts because I know that you've been looking at the sort of the back office and thinking about innovation, not just in terms of how you do new things in terms of the services you provide, but actually the back office function. So I just wondered if you could give us some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think, back office is, what's that all about? That's, again, streamlining the organisation and taking away a lot of the administrative burden from various colleagues on certain things. So that could be your HR. I think we had the example before that, you know, a certain amount, apparently IBM are looking at AI doing 90% of their HR function because, you know, a lot of that can be automated. But simple things like your travel and booking system. I mean, you know, apparently I'm very inefficient. I email my secretary and we have a tete-a-tete. You know, 5 emails later, I actually seize upon the actual time I want to go and where I want to go and what hotel and all the rest of it. You can do that in an automated AI way. That's going to be very, very efficient and take all of that administrative burden. My secretary will have less headaches having to chase me up on things and so forth. And that can feed into, you know, your project management system and how you update your clients on their costs. You know, I've got a nice singing, dancing system that tells me when I'm at 80% of the budget, so I quickly have to email the client to say, can we have a, you know, can we extend the budget? All of that stuff is really helpful because it just streamlines what we do. And then I think ultimately by being more streamlined, we can have better communication with our clients. And apparently I was at an event years ago, I work predominantly with the education sector, and they asked, the IT provider in the room asked everyone to put up their hand if they use email as their main form of communication. And as they went through the different age groups, my hand was still up. And he said, is that because most of the people that you talk to are over 30? And I thought, oh, does it show? But you know, I do think the way we communicate is going to be changed in the future. You know, WhatsApp is a good example, and I use it a lot more now after the hearing processes that I've been through, because I can actually communicate with clients so much quicker. I can be in a hearing with them remotely, and I can even be presenting and still quickly, you know, send them the message. And it's just streamlined how we can communicate, and in a more colloquial way as well. You know, I think that feeds through into lots of other things in terms of, you know, sort of the briefings and things we give out. You know, our marketing teams that don't do long-winded articles, bite-sized, one paragraph that you can just send out, you know, using social media in a very tech-friendly way. So I think there's lots to be gained, there's lots of pluses there, but again, taking soundings from your colleagues to understand what it is they really need and want is really helpful, because then you get that buy-in internally.
Could I just add that on those internal bits, making our colleagues' lives easier, again, I appreciate I'm a little bit of a stuck record on this, but again, there's an opportunity to really enhance the client experience through that. So client onboarding, I mean, honestly, it's exceptionally painful. We all make it very hard for somebody to want to pay us money to do something. There are opportunities to gradually, it's not boil the ocean overnight, but there are opportunities gradually to make that a more collaborative process, to make that something that is part of the client experience, part of differentiating your offering, a reason for clients to have a relationship with you. When it comes to financial management and billing, again, there are fantastic, and today, compared to even a couple of years ago, far easier ways of making that a far more seamless process. Again, yes, it can make our people's lives easier, but you don't start there, because no point making our people's lives easier if we don't have any clients. So you need to start with the client. Let's make their life easier. It's simpler for them to pay us, and it also happens to help our accounts teams, etc.
Thank you very much. Well, we're out of time. I feel we could talk all day. It's been a fascinating discussion, but it's time for a break. Can I just say thank you to the panellists for making that such an interesting session.